All right. Hello, guys. Thanks for the interaction. Yeah, I'm Totó. My full name is Tamás Harkai, and I'm a developer here at Digital Natives, basically one floor below in this building. A little bit about me is I've used to work with, I started my developer career as an Android developer, native Android developer, then moved on to Xamarin. And after that, joined Digital Natives, where I developed in React and React Native for a while. And it was around 2 years ago when I first heard about Flutter, and I remember the first meetup that was actually in this space or room 2 years ago, before COVID. And it's really great to be here now. And it was nice to see that if I look at the stage, that I should be the one who presented. It was a great feeling. So I'm really happy that I see you here now after all this, and it's not online, but it's actually in person. So yeah, that's about me. I would like to ask, just right now, also the talk is about Flutter for React with React background. I'm curious how many of you have tried out Flutter already? So do you have any experience in it? Okay, and there are a few. And have you actually used it in professionally developing it? Okay, that's great, because this talk is really about introductory level. So I'm happy that it's not the majority raised up their hand. So great. With Digital Natives, we are right now working on our third real Flutter application. And this time it's in partnership with Bene Studio, so we are working together on a product or an application. And in this workshop, I would like to start and show the ways of how we are developing currently an application. What are some good practices that we are already using, and yeah, some nice things, and also at few points show the similarities between React, because actually there are many similarities. You will see. So if you would like to try out Flutter and you have React experience, many things will look similar if you are using those packages that I will use today, or I will show you today. So it's really not a big leap to try out Flutter and jump in, because the philosophy is the same. But in my understanding, or in my experience, it's a much better developer experience, or a better all-around tooling and the all-around philosophy of how Flutter is working under the hood. That brings me to the point of why I really love Flutter. And the main reason, don't sleep. So the main reason is Flutter, as opposed to all the previous cross-platform technologies, like Xamarin or React Native, it's actually not trying to, at platform level, compile to the platform versions of certain widgets. So if you write a list view, as opposed to the previous cross-platform frameworks, it won't be an Android list view and an iOS list view based on to which platform you compile to. But actually, Flutter is the one who is responsible for rendering those widgets. So Flutter doesn't have to solve that big issue of trying to have a unified interface or unified framework for the differences between the two platforms, Android and iOS mainly. So that's really great, because it solves many issues. For example, I don't know, I used to have really early at my developer experience, I had to write if iOS, then do this in CSS, if Android, do that. Maybe that was because of my lack of experience, but anyhow, that was how it was. And in Flutter, everything is just rethought, and it's built up based on, at that point of time, I don't know exactly, maybe 2014, somewhere around that. At that time, which were the usual patterns in an applications, like the material design has just were created around that. And in a Flutter application, everything is, or not everything, but the main way of how you put an application together is kind of following all those design patterns that you would normally have. Like you can have a scaffold, which is a basic scaffold of an application, and there you have properties like up bar and body and bottom navigation bar, drawer, floating action button, all these kinds of things that usually an application has. And this is built together and put together in a way that helps the developer speed up and do all those things easily that would be done in the majority of the applications. So that's a really great thing in Flutter, that you don't need to emulate or don't need to put the platform's differences under the same hood and try to make a unified interface. And obviously, there are many performance improvements or performance gains with that, because in a Flutter application, both platforms give to the Flutter engine their canvas, so their screen, and Flutter takes over and does the rendering. And that's really nice because it also solves, for example, compatibility issues in Android. So you don't really need to care about how this will look on an older version of Android, because an older phone can just give a canvas to the Flutter engine and it will look the same. The performance will be altered by, obviously, how good the processor is in a phone, but that's obvious. So yeah, that's a really nice thing. And as I said, it tries to make the things that you would do easy for you. And another example is implicit animations. It's really easy to create really nice user experience and really nice looking application without having to explicitly tell how to animate something to an actual place. By implicit, I mean that you can just specify that what value you want something to be at. So let's say opacity, like you want the widget to fade out. You just say the number, like you want the opacity to be, and give a duration. Okay, this is doable in React Native, so I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to compare them. It's just based on my previous experiences with mobile development. This is a really easy thing to do, and it's much easier than I've did it before. So that's really nice as well. Yeah. Another thing is that it's not scattered. You have just Dart code, and you can just nest things together. Maybe you have heard about, in Flutter, everything's a widget. That's a really nice catchphrase that they like to say. And it's actually true, and many times I felt that, oh, thank God, this is also a widget. So in an app bar, I can just put a widget, and the app bar will draw out that widget that I put in it. For example, in native Android, I could only give there a string, a title. I couldn't just put there an icon or whatever I would want. So that's also a really nice philosophy, and it really helps with implementing this really great or really global, well, not global, maybe that's not the best word, but essentially in Flutter, you are composing widgets together, as you would also do in React or React Native. But here it's really visible how you have a widget which is responsible for one thing, and then you can nest all this together and build a layout with this principle. And at first, to me, it was intimidating, and I was afraid of, oh my God, this will be a deep something, and I won't see the end of it. But with proper formatting and refactoring, it can be made really nice, especially when you can, when you are actually depending or separating the UI logic from the business logic, which is obviously doable with proper separation. And at that point, you will see where your logic is, and then the UI code is built up, and it makes sense. So you don't need to care about XML and CSS and all other stuff. You just have Dart, and you have your nesting. So that's really nice. This is also a thing I love about that. So I saw a few of you that have already checked out or cloned the repository, which was sent out to you. If you don't have access to that, I will show it to you where you can access it. It's on Bene Studio's GitHub. So let's ask first who doesn't have access or who doesn't have it cloned. Hello, Lucas. So Bene Studio's GitHub. Yeah, it's here. Maybe this is not really readable. Oh, I'm not opening a PR. Yeah, so if you have this downloaded and have Flutter installed, that basically you are ready to go. First, I would like to show what will be the end result. And if my phone sleeps, then I have to reconnect Visor. So I'm closing this right now and opening it again. No, yeah. Okay, so Set game. Set is a card game. I don't know if you've heard about it. I won't really go into the details or talk too much about it. Let's start the game. Here you have different cards with different. That's okay. Different cards with different colors and shapes and some properties. Basically, as you see here, colors, shapes, textures, or multiplicity. And the goal of a set game is, as you see, like it's here, cards are laid down on the board, and the players who are actually playing needs to find sets. A set is cards where three properties, or how should I say, among all four properties, they either have all the same or all different values. So let's quickly try to put a set together here. That's a hard thing to do actually right now. Yeah, a little bit of, if someone finds a set, then they can shout it. Anyco is really great at finding set, but I think I already have one. So if I find this, as you can see here, the color is the same, multiplicity is different, texture is different, and shape is different as well. So this is a set, and the goal of the game is finding this. And this is what we're gonna do. Not fully. Obviously, there is a base game, and what I would also like to show is how we are currently, when we are doing an application, how does it look like when we are fetching some data from the backend, from the server? How does that go through our business layer logic, and how it will ultimately get into the UI? And how does it look when we are showing that something is being loaded, something has an error, or something is actually available, and we can show the data? To show that, how that will look is, if I open the high scores, this screen is loading some public API, some example data, and then, as you saw, there was a loading indicator in the middle, and when the data was available, the list appeared, and it appeared really nicely, actually. And that's also done implicitly, so I didn't have to do much. Yeah, that's mainly it. So let's jump into the code. The first thing that I would like to show, just to have the similarities between React Native and Flutter, is the pubspec. So if you navigate to the pubspec.yaml file, is it readable? Is it OK? No, not readable. A little higher.
Can you try light mode, maybe?
Light?
Yeah, because of the wall.
Ooh, OK. Woohoo. Which one would you like? The default?
Yeah, this is nice.
Oh, OK. Great. OK, so the pubspec. This is basically your package.json. Here we specify the dependencies, and there are also dev dependencies. These won't get put into or built into the final artifact. So yeah, nothing much here. As you would have guessed, these are the versions, and I think the same rule applies with the special characters about how you specify your dependencies. Another thing is the analysis options. This is basically this is the linting. We usually, or in every project, we use a pre-created list of what are the good lintings that we should have enabled. So this comes from the lint package. And here we specify which we would like to disable, because obviously we would like to disable a few which we don't want to have. Another important thing is to have the analyzer strong mode applied, so that the Dart code that we are actually writing is more restrictive about types. This is an important thing to have, and it helps you eliminate type issues, because it's more strong, more. Yeah, you get it. It's stronger. it tells more probable errors. You can exclude fries from analyzing and change the severity of lints. That's the analysis options. All right, let's go back here. So we have the menu screen, and here on the left you see that how the data the folder structure looks like. So we usually have modules, the game, high scores, instructions, and I have the menu here separately here in the screens, menu screen. And this is a comment, or this is not even a comment. It's actually written here to help you tell where is the end of a widget. So treat it as it's not actually here. First, it could be a little intimidating to look at the Flutter code. It was definitely a little strange for me at first, because I don't know, it can just get too much. And Flutter by nature, it's really verbose. Like you can write out really long, I don't know, properties, but it's actually also more expressive. So that's the price. It's more verbose, but it's also telling or more expressive what it does. What I really like is, for example, we have the column, which is a flex, a div in a flex, where the flex direction is, yeah, you get what column is. And instead of justify content and align items, what we have is main axis alignment. So the column's main axis, it goes down, and it's space around, space between evenly. So the same stuff. And cross-axis alignment, these are also probably similar to you. So you don't need to think about what does this actually do, because I remember that I had to think about this when I was writing CSS. Yes?
Yeah, I have two quick questions. The first one is, how do you start the app? What is the command that you type? And the second one is, maybe you're going to come to that shortly, but in case you don't want to, I mean, the folders that we can see on the right, on the left rather, on the lead, what are data, models, and modules? Yeah, what do they?
To start the application, you have to do two things. First is run flutter pub get. This is like npm install. After this is done, you basically do flutter run. With -d, you can specify the target, but if you just run it, it will give you options, and it will probably give Chrome as an option as well. But if you have an emulator, a simulator running, then you choose that. Yeah, so these are the two commands. About the folder structure, what we usually are doing is that we try to keep the different services which are only used by certain modules inside their own module. We will get to that point what a qubit is, but for example, a qubit is something that we are putting here. This is responsible for data, like the business logic, actually. And we try to keep it simple. We were experimenting with, I don't know, having here a widgets folder as well and a screens folder as well, but our projects that we were working on didn't get so big that we had to have much bigger or yeah, more nested packaging or yeah, structuring. So in a game module, I have here out the widgets that we use, and in the data, classes that are not strictly rendering things out, but more used to what's the underlying logic of that module. Outside of module, we have presentation. In presentation, we have those widgets which are not strictly tied to module, but rather helper widgets or yeah, like hero animation, a dialogue, these kind of things, which you wouldn't put to a specific module. Yeah, or theming. We also have routing. That's here, and the data is again, like as in a module, things that are not drawing out, but they are general or global things. Utils, services. Here we have API client, service. So what's used to communicate with the backend, kind of. But we could have here, I don't know, notifications, for example. Yeah, so this is the base structure. Okay, so we were on the menu screen. Yeah. So as I said, it's more verbose, and because it's not separated how you define your layout, so you don't have different, I don't know, either HTML, CSS, or JSX. It's all together here in one file, in one widget. Everything's a widget. So because it's spec'd here, it's a little bigger than how you would I don't know, expect it to be. So it can be a little too much first, so it needs some getting used to, but I find it that ultimately it's really handy that I know where things will be, and I can just read how it will build up and what is containing it. Yeah, so that's it. So as I said, what we would do first, even though the game is about set, I would like to first show how we are fetching data and how we are showing that, because I think that's important, and that's what every application has to do. So not every application has to play a set game. So let's do that first. I think I will need to run. I have mifun as a snippet, which is running on my phone. Yeah. And there's already a high score screen created, so please navigate there. It's pre-created because there are also some shortcomings with Flutter, like it's not bells and whistles, everything. So it has some drawbacks as well, or not so great working features. For example, it's not so easy to implement a class if you are trying to implement an extension function from it. A Dart feature is to have extension functions. You probably know what those are. So they are basically static functions on a given type, which you can define. And as a language feature, you can just treat it as if it was part of the original class's definition. Yeah, so here we have the high scores, and it runs, so yeah, I cannot even navigate to that. So let's go back to the menu screen. So just write the code that that helps us navigate to the screen. No, actually, different file. First, in the app auto router, this is routing. So there are, I don't want to go into much history of how navigation is done in Flutter, but in order to support web, which was recently started to be, I don't know if it's unstable, but Flutter supports web, compiling for web, and they had to rewrite their routing a little because it wasn't really supporting this parsing the path, and so actually handling the URL properly. So there is a newer version of navigation, but that's really verbose and really complex to use. So there are many libraries that try to aid that for the user and make it more simple. And the solution that we are using is a package called AutoRoute, and that's the highest liked package on pub.dev, which solves this issue, and I actually understand why. You have to create a class and annotate it with custom autorouter, and then create your route. Now this is really simple because our application is not complex, but just so that I show something that's a little bit more, yeah, there are more routes in it, is, for example, this definition. So as you see, there is the base, I don't know, splash route, and then there's authentication where you have the sign-in screen, which is the default, sign up, password reset, etc. And then you have the inside, so the app when you are actually logged in. And here are screens related to certain modules, and this is an app tabs router. We can use this as the, let's call, engine of a bottom navigation bar. So we can nicely map these routes to a bottom navigation bar, and it handles state persistence, or keeping the state when you are switching between tabs. So this is how it looks when the application is a little bit more, has more screens, or it's bigger. Come back. Okay, so here we have the auto route, and this actually requires code generation. This is, so in Flutter, we usually have code generation, or how should I say, if you are using a few packages which are really advised to be used, then you will most probably need to also include or add code generation to your pipeline. As I said, the navigation is verbose and requires much code to write, and this is really simple. So under the hood, it will generate code that will help us. What we are doing is, maybe this is good practice, maybe not, but it works for us. We are committing our generated code. It's not important to look at this now. It's generated code, but we have it here. So we have the high score screen, and this little property tells this autorouter that it should create routes by renaming the screen part of all the routes to route. So at the end, what we can do is in the menu screen, write in the onPressed function that we have here, and follow me now, we write context.router.navigate, and as it's up here, we can cheat from here and say navigate to the high scores route. So this was pre-created, so we don't need to generate now the file. It's actually in the README how to generate a file, but for sake of simplicity and ease, that's generated, or the repo contains that. And this is running on 2 instances. This is the release version. May fun. Okay, so if you refresh, if the application is running from a command line when you executed Flutter run, then if you press R, it's doing a hot reload, which is almost instantaneous and applies your changes. There are certain scenarios where it's more advised to use Shift R, like write a bigger case R, which will hot restart the application, and that will like actually restart everything. But that's also fast. So not right now, if I click the high score button, we are navigating to this screen, the high score screen. Okay. So we need data to show here, right? Because we don't know what to show. This is really empty. we have the high scores qubit file, but this is empty now. Qubits, so there are many ways of handling state or handling business logic in a Flutter app. You can use Redux if you want. So there is a Redux package. There is MobX, and there are many more. Yeah, there are many more which you could try out and pick whichever you want. Usually Redux is not the main thing that developers use, although it's probably working, and if you are familiar with that, go with it however you like. My preference was the block library, and block is, so qubits are simpler versions of block. They are newer or leaner, easier to use versions. I would say that they are analogous to use contexts. So when you are creating a context and you have your data in it that you want to provide to the subtree of your components tree in React, with qubits you can basically do the same. So you can create a qubit, provide that, and from the lower levels or lower widgets can get an instance, not an instance, get a reference to the qubit that you've created and use it. So let's create a qubit. And how we do that is let's write class high scores qubit, which will extend a qubit. Now a qubit needs a state. Let's write here string just so that it's not crying. And we need to import the Flutter block package. Before generating what it wants to do, no, we can do that as well. Create the constructor, and let's remove these parameters. Next thing which I would like to show to you is what data object or what class we use to represent when we are loading, or what's the state of a resource that we are loading. For that, we have the Fetchable Resource class. Now, this could be, again, a little too much. Now, looking at this, what the hell, right? This is using a package called Freezed. Again, this is a package that I think without this, life in Flutter or Dart maybe would be much harder. So this, again, solves many problems for us. Coming from Android background, I developed in Java, but in Kotlin as well. And Kotlin was obviously much better. And there are data classes. What data classes can do essentially is you can well, it's already from out of the box has equals overridden. Well, not overridden, but it's implemented or defined on them, and it can compare them nicely. And another thing, what's a really good feature of a data class is that as it's good to use immutable state immutable state to represent your UI. So it's good not to mutate the state, because then it can get messy, and you probably also lose history if you would want to have that. So it's nice to have immutable state. And freezed helps with that because it generates a copy with function. And copy with is, as you would imagine, if you have a freezed class or a freezed object, and it has like 3 properties, you can copy with it, create a new instance with updating just a certain properties. And that will be a new instance, and you are not imitating your previous one. All good. So this fetchable resource. Here there are 4 factory constructors. This is kind of a syntax that creates your freezed class. I never write this, so I have nice snippets which are creating my, I don't know, it's a this is what it comes, or how you have to use it, or how it will be easy instead of copy pasting. What it will do for us, a fetchable resource can be in 4 states. Unavailable, it's either fetching, you already have the data and it's available, or in an error state. Yeah, that's about it. It can tell which, like getters tell if it has data, it returns the data or null. That's, again, a really great thing I love about Dart, that it has null safety, and it only has it since not much, like half a year. Yeah, so that's fetchable resource. And when we are loading some data from the network, we are putting it in a fetchable resource, and then we know what's its state. So in our qubit, we will represent the list of things that we are loading, so the high scores, in a fetchable resource. Instead of string, let's write fetchable resource, and it will be a list. So the state will be a list of scores. We need to import that. 2 type parameters. Yeah, the fetchable resource requires you to define what is the state when you have data and what's when you have an error. And for that, we are having a network error. This is just a thing that has a message. So decouple it from any loader or any package that loads data from the network. So this is how it is. It would probably need a code as well, maybe. For sake of simplicity, network error has a message. OK, so our qubit is holding a fetchable resource. As you saw, that it has an unavailable state. So in the super constructor, we need to define what is the default state of this qubit. By default, we don't have anything, so it's not available. OK, so we have a qubit, we have our state, which holds our value, and the type is right, but we need a way to load the data. What we are doing is we have, as I showed before here in the service, first the AP client. This is the closest part to the outer world. So here you have, your get, put, post, whatever. You have the endpoint, and ultimately you will parse that data and return it back. Here we return a future of list of scores. Future is the promise in Dart, so all the same rule applies, and async function here, then you can evade things, and yeah, so this is just a regular call to the backend. And the next thing, the AP client is used by the API service. Now here again we have a few types nested in, which can be a little overwhelming first. There is in functional programming there is the either monad type, and either what's essentially is doing is that it can hold you 2 values, or it's either one value or the other. Simply put, that's only what it does. To be honest, we wouldn't even need to use this separate package, darts. So this is a package that gives many functional programming classes in Dart. We wouldn't need to use that because we are only using either, and you will see how it looks when we are using an either typed object. But now, in the API service, what we use API service for is that essentially getting rid of exceptions, so that in our business logic, we don't really need to care about when something is failing. So we don't need to try catch. We are returning eithers. So we are just calling the high scores. We are calling the proper function of the API client, and if it's right, then we return right, which is of this type. But if it fails, then we turn the left type, so a left. That's mainly it. And now we will write the code that handles what this get high score function returns. So we will need an API service in our high scores qubit. We will just put it here as a constructor parameter because we are the one who will create a qubit. We are the one who can have an API service, so we don't really need any bigger dependency injection or any complex thing. So let's write a field. Let it be API service, and let's call it service. Let's import it. Now Dart says that, hey, you should somehow put something here. So this is a final non-nullable thing, and I don't know what it is. So that needs to be a constructor parameter. So what brackets are these?
Braces.
Braces, thanks. Squiggly brackets. So in braces, let's write braces here and required this.service. This is a language feature of Dart. So if I write it in braces, that means that I will have to define it as a named argument. You will see shortly what it means. OK, so now the qubit has a service. So our business logic thing knows how to communicate with the outside. So let's write a function that's a future, which will fetch high scores. Let's make it async. And what we will do is, in order to notify all those classes or objects or constructs that are actually using this qubit, we need to update our state. Obviously, we have a state, and we need a way to update it, and so tell others, our listeners, that we are updating it. And the way to do that is emitting. So there's a function on a qubit called emit, and it obviously requires a state type. So we are emitting, so we are loading something, so let's emit that we are in the fetchable resource in a fetching state. So this will be our new state. Yeah, and we can even make it a constant. All right, so we are fetching. The next thing is that we actually need to load the data, obviously. So let's write final high scores equal service that get high scores. Now this is a future, so I either return it, or I mean not return. I either put it into the variable like this, but I can just await it, and then I can actually use the either, which this returns. So now it's of type either. Let's handle this either. All the exceptions and all the bad things that can happen here is handled by the API service. So what we need to do is call this function fold. It requires two other functions which are handling the state. In Flutter, or not, rather in Dart, and basically in every language, it's really nice if you are formatting the code based on the predefined rules that's there and provides you the formatting functionality. So this is not so readable that we have this next to each other. So if I would format, I have its own command something. You can format probably, or either it's set up to format and save. These are next to each other. But usually, if you have multiple properties, if you put a comma and format, then it will break into multiple lines. And it's yeah, as you saw, it can be a little like nested, and based on where are the commas, it formats the codes differently. So yeah, this is a good thing. So have them in separate lines. So the left case is when we have an error, and the right case is when we are actually having the high scores. Now maybe this is not, maybe this sounds strange, but I like to just shadow the actual high scores. In the previous, I sometimes wrote high scores either, and then I handled the either, but it was, I don't know, messy, and it was already the lines are long here, so let's not make it longer. I never use an either instance any longer, only when I'm folding, so I usually just write here high scores as well. And then in this scope, I can just use the high scores as the actual data and not the either, which is outside here. This is my preference. Do it anyhow you like it. So when there's an error state, what we will do is we emit a fetchable resource error, and we give it the error. And when things go right, we are emitting a fetchable resource available with the data that we have. And we are not returning anything. This can be a block body or an expression body, nice and lean. Yeah, that's it. We have the fetch functionality, and we are emitting the proper state based on what's the state actually, or what the service returned back. OK, great. So now we have a function that does the loading. Now we should get that fetchable resource state and show it on the UI. Let's do this first, and then see how it goes. OK, so no, let's first provide. That's the nice way. So we have in the data this global scope dependencies. This is, again, just a widget which we use in the main. Like the whole application is wrapped in a global scope dependencies. And here we are providing all those, yeah, like qubits usually, or we are creating the classes or objects that the whole application will probably use or need to get the reference to. So the global scoped stuff that the application depends on. And here we already have a game qubit that's used by the game, actually. So let's here now also provide the high scores qubit. So you can just duplicate this line, or these 3 lines, and let's provide a high scores qubit. Now, high scores qubit requires a service. And here, as I said, it will be a named parameter. So I have to define that the service will be the API service dot value. We will soon get to what a use state is, but you will probably know what that is. The value is actually the value. If you just write API service, that's a value notifier. The value notifier is something that actually others can register to get notified when the data that it holds changes. So it notifies about its value change. That's what it does. So let's pass in the API service to the qubit. OK, and now it's provided. It's provided so high here that the whole application can now get a reference to the high scores qubit. Obviously, you could do it anywhere you want. So you might not want it to be provided to the whole application, just to that subset or this screen. That's, again, up to preference. Sometimes it's just easier to have things here. And yeah, so we provided it. Now, let's go to the high score screen and get a reference to that. Here in the build function, we will get the state. What we will do is final high scores equal to context.select. And context.select select is an extension function of on the context. And if this block wouldn't be imported, then it would be hard to import because it cannot really help. So this is why it's imported. Provider is a different thing. So context.select. And this requires, or it needs you to tell what you want to select. And we will see what selecting means in short. We need to type in that we want the high scores qubit. And that's the qubit. This requires a function. And now we define what we actually want from this qubit. We want its state. And that qubit state is a fetchable resource. So here we will have that fetchable resource that we've just emitted there, or yeah, what we defined there. What context select does is it registers that this widget, or rather this context here, is listening to this state. It will know when it has to re-render the widget itself, so when it needs to show the updated data, when the return of this function is different. So if I would have a state that has multiple properties, and I would just, I don't know, select the name out of that, and in some business logic operation, I update the, let's call this as a profile, I update not the name, but the other stuff, but the name doesn't change, then this doesn't rebuild. And that's really great because you can optimize how you want your widget to rebuild. Obviously, you want to lower that because it can hinder performance. No need to go overboard with that. So there's no need to really try to, I don't know, select everything at the right time, because yeah, you could do that, but usually this is fine, and you probably won't have so complex widgets. Obviously, it can happen, and it's nice to optimize, but don't early optimize. OK, so we have the high scores. And it's a fetchable resource. So let's see another thing which freezed as a package does for us and generates in the code, or generates when we generate a freezed class. Let's remove the body, and right here, highscores.when. It prefills us with 4 property names. If you type the comma here and format, it will format it nicely. And this will require functions that handle that state. So the unavailable type doesn't have any variable. So when it's not available, we can just return a widget. I don't know. Let's show that, I don't know, not available. OK, great. For the fetching part, the fetching is defined that it can hold the previous state that it had. So if you want to refetch something, you can type here anything. It will be a list of score, and it's nullable because it might not exist. It can also be underscore. So if you're not using anything, it's better to just have underscore as a parameter name. So if it's fetching, then let's show in a center widget, let's show a circular progress indicator. Great. Now, the nice part, or the interesting part, when we have data, high scores. So when we have data, we would want to show a list. Let's do that. So writing a list. List view dot. There are here, if you open, I don't know, IntelliSense or suggestions, there are 3 constructors. These are named constructors. This is also a nice function of Dart, that you can have a constructor, like, constructor, and it can have a name. And there is the list view that's separated. The only thing that it does from the simple list view, that you can give it a separator builder. So it requires 3 properties. Let's define the first one, the item count. It will be the high scores length, obviously. The separation builder, this requires a function that's given a context and an index. But actually, we will not use that, because what we will return is just a divider, if I wouldn't have mistyped that. So we are not using that. Let's call it just underscore. And what we will show when we want to render an actual child, for sake of simplicity, you can create your own widget here and use it, but Flutter is, it's implementing all, or not all, but many of the material widgets. So it gives you all the widgets that requires to build a material-looking application. So one of those is the list tile. List tile looks like a list tile, and it has many properties, which, right? And it has many properties like leading, which can be an icon that shows at the left side, or depending on the LTR. What's the name for that? Anyhow, It has many properties that you can define, but what we will just use now is the title. And title is also a widget, so it's not a string. So we will need to put here text. Text will be the high scores index.username. OK. We will see. And the subtitle, let's write out what's the actual score of that individual. That will be high scores of index. Yeah, the type. The problem is that I haven't defined the parameters of the function. Item builder also needs a context and an index. So, yeah, OK, not so red anymore. Great. And let's use here the time. And let's do string that. Yeah, great. So we have the list style. The last thing that we need to handle it is when it's in an error state, and it has an error. Well, let's write it out. Well, the error can be null. This is how it's defined. So it says now that message can be unconditionally accessed because the error is a nullable type. So let's question mark it. And then it doesn't know, like, the text requires a string, so we give it a string. Oops. OK. Yeah, we have it. The last thing is we need to trigger this loading. You can have many ways of triggering that. It's either doable when you are creating the qubit here, so that you start fetching really early at the application when it renders. Obviously, the global scope dependencies start really early, so it's created right when the application starts. What we will do now is use an effect. Use effect. It has the same syntax that it has in React. So first it needs a function and an array format. And in use effect, we will need to get an instance of this qubit. As you see here, we don't have the instance, we just have its state. But in order to get the qubit, you are not selecting that, but you can read it from the context. There are different usages. So, for example, you have to use read when you are in a handler of a button click. Anyhow, the docs says that or tells it nicely. You can read the qubit, high scores qubit, and we call fetch high scores. OK, now we have everything, I hope. If you now open the console, or depending on how you run it, if you hot restart, then we will see if we have everything. Didn't click that. OK, high scores. It's loading, and the data appeared. This is the brief of how we are getting data. One nice thing which was there on the initial application that I showed is that they appeared like in a staggered manner. It wasn't just an instant flash of all the items after the load was finished. And I really like when an application has all these really nice features. And since it's easy to do it in Flutter, I like to use them. So let's do that. In order to create such animation, we will also, or again, use a package which solves this for us. To do that, we need to go to the available handler and wrap our widget, this two separated. If you open the quick fix command, the IDE suggests you many ways of what you can do with this given widget, and we will now wrap it in. Wow, this has changed. Just yesterday, the new version of Flutter came out, 2.5, after 2 months, and this wrap with widget was the first item, but now it's not the first one. Anyhow, let's wrap it with a widget and give it the name of animation limiter. Animation limiter comes from the package called Flutter Staggered Animations. And another thing that we are going to do is now we have to wrap our items. So let's wrap them again. And that will be animation configuration dot staggered list. Okay, now that we've wrapped it, it requires a position to be defined, and the position is the index. Now, in theory, we are fine, but we need to define how we want to actually animate it, so how it should animate. In order to do that, let's again wrap our widget, our item, in something. The widget is fade in animation. Great. Let's reload. And that's it. And it looks really cool. Obviously, you can go mad. There are more versions of, I don't know, scaling and offset widgets, so they can come in from sides and grow and expand. But less is more sometimes. OK, that was it. We've implemented the high score screen. Do you guys have any questions? Was it followable? Great. OK. So let's go to the actual game. Now here, this is not really interactable. So if you navigate to the game, you can tap. Maybe the end game works. And the hint doesn't work. You cannot click on items. That doesn't work. So what we're going to do now is actually handle the case when the user selects an item. So let's go to the set board widget and close everything else. Now, there are many things here which implement the UI. I don't want to go through them. You can read it if you want later. It's building out the whole screen. But the main part where we are going to work is the main set board widget. And as you see, this is not a stateless or a stateful widget, which are coming from the Flutter API itself, but is a hook widget. And also, our high score screen was a hook widget as well. So this is how a widget requires to be a hook widget to use hooks. Really great. The stateful widgets are terrible, so it's good that we have hooks. Yes? I thought you had a question.
It was Max, but actually I did have a question.
OK.
What does this const mean that you have to put?
Const is, so if you have a class that can have a const constructor, it means that, so if I create, this, where is the const now? Const is actually making a widget that when this text is re-rendered again, so for example, this part of the tree is re-rendered, then a new instance of this text is not created, but the compiler knows that this is how you define it once, and then this instance can be used all the time because its state doesn't change. So it's optimizing. Sorry?
How is it able to do that?
Good question.
If the actual string would change, it would re-render it, right?
If the actual string would change, then yes, but there are certain requirements for a thing to be a const. So if I would use here a variable, then I couldn't use a const. So if I have a final state or a, I don't know, name, use state like Totó, and I would write it out here, or what would put it here, name.value, then I cannot have it as a const anymore because it's not constant. Its value can change. And so it knows that if I have a what's that string expression?
It can't be dynamic.
Yeah. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it. Thank you. Yeah, so however, endgame. All right, back to the set board. So we will have a state for the cards that we select. So selected cards equals useState. And now useState needs to know what kind of state it holds. I can either give it a type like this, or it can inherence. No, when it figures out from the type what its type is, infer it. Now, how the application works is that I haven't showed that actually in example, but it's possible to have widgets or cards, for example, in this slot and in this, but not in the middle. How I implemented this is with actual nulls. So the widgets are expecting a list of cards, but they could be nullable. So our state will be set card question mark and the, I don't know, this bracket. I'm not good with brackets. Square brackets. Thank you. I think I can't have this as a const. Yeah. So this is not a const. Yeah. OK. Selected cards. We have now a state that holds the cards. Let's write a function that is being called when the user taps on one of the cards on the board. So that will be void handle card pressed. And that function is going to receive a set card, which will be an actual card, cannot be null, the user pressed something. And this function should be put here, line 41 for me, in the onCardPressed, I don't know, property. There are two ways to do that. I'm either calling it in this function body, or what I can do is use a tear-off. I think that's the word for it. So I'm just passing over the function's reference. So now this function is called when the card grid emits or tells the outer world that a card is pressed. OK, so now that a card has been pressed, let's handle that, what we need to do. What we have to do is check whether the selected cards contain it. Because if it does, then we need to remove it. So if the selected cards.value contains the card, then what we will do is create a new instance or a new array of the cards. And how we will do is final updated cards, updated. Updated cards. Let's spread back in what we had in the selected cards. And there's an extension function which I wrote replace. Replace item with null. So let's replace the card. We cannot just do this, but we will soon see why. Updated cards, let's rather call it like this. The replace item with null is not returning a new list, actually, but returns void. I know this is not good, but I've used the internal things which are also doing that, and I thought that, OK, it's fine like this. So we are updating this new list of cards in a way that we are replacing this card with null. Last thing we need to do is update this state with our new state. So the selected cards equal updated cards. Now, a nice syntax in Dart is the, let's call it double dot operator. What it does is, here I can just do double dot and call replace items with null, so the same thing that I had here. And calling this like, first, let me show it this way. So as you see here, the updated cards type is void, because this returns void, and I've just chained this. But if I do it with double dots, it's not void anymore, but list of set cards. And So this line here is equal to these two. Well, not this part, obviously. Okay. So we have the updated cards. This is nice, actually, when you want to return something, but do something on the returned value. So it can help you reduce the code, but yeah, it's arguable how readable it is. So again, taste. But it's shorter like this, so let's use this. And I can actually just use this expression and update the selected cards like this. OK, great. Let's handle the case when the card is not selected or doesn't. The tapped card doesn't contain. It's not selected. For that, we will update the selected cards. Spread in again what we had here before. And what we do here is, what was the name of that function? Yeah, replace first null or add. What this does is, if I have a null somewhere in this list, and I could have in the middle, for example, so the first and the last card is selected, and the middle one is not, and the user clicks on the last card, it should be put here in the middle. So this function is replacing the first null or adds it to the list if it's not there. All right. Last thing, if 3 cards are selected, so after doing this, oh wait, no. I want to handle the case when there are already 3 cards selected and the user taps a 4th one. I think this will be inside another if. If the current selected cards as value and the effective length is the item count disregarding nulls is less than 3, then we can put it in. Otherwise, our cards will equal to that singular card that has been selected. So the previous ones are discarded from the selection. OK, I think that's it. That's the handle card selected. Now what we need to do is use this value. And here the set board, or the set board, and here the card grid requires the highlighted cards, what it should highlight as selected. So we can just put that value here. And also, there is the picked card info. This is the bottom widget here. This also requires the cards. Let's put it here as well. OK. Now, in theory, I cannot use this as a const anymore. All good. Now, hot restart. And now I can click on an item, and that is kept in a use state, so it's a local state, and I can pick cards. So right now, if I select the middle one, it will unselect it, and I can put new cards in there. So we have the selection. Now, obviously, there are multiple ways to do it. I mean, you can have it here that as a local state. You can have it as a qubit state as well. It's up to you. To showcase the use state and how it's used, now this is now a use state. All right. There is another feature, the hints. So we can help the user by pre-selecting a value that's already that we know that it's part of a set. We can do that as well. Do you guys have any question so far, or it's all good?
Yes, I have an error for set board in the game screen. It's underline, says try removing
Yeah, because of I'm using the state here, I had to remove the const constructor from the set board. And if you go to the game screen where you have the set board, you don't have the const keyword there, but you should have it on maybe line 28 on the pop guard. So there probably is a const here, up here. Do you have that? This const means that all the subtree should be treated as a constant, but it's not because the set board doesn't have a const constructor. So we need to remove this. Sorry, I removed this fast without actually telling out what I was doing. So you need to remove this const from the pop guard. Okay. Let's move on. Here we have the info panel widget that's encapsulating all that's on the right side. Cheers. And what's given here a property or requires as a property this hint buttons callback. So request hint is called when this hint button is pressed. Let's do now the selecting a card that is part of a set. So to know which cards are part of the set, let's go into the game qubit. The game qubit is where we have the deck and the board as states. So they are lists of set cards. And this is where we have the logic of the game. We can initialize that, draw cards, check if something is a set, and handle the case when it's a set. But in its state, there are a few getters. So yeah, getters, which derive their value based on what's the actual state. And here we have the set cards getter. So this returns all those cards that are currently in part or formulating a set. Could be used to formulate a set on the board. So use this. Let's use this. This is now an event handler, so we are not using context.select, but rather context.read. And we read out the game qubit. OK, we have that. From its state, we will get the set cards. In order to show different card when it's tabbed multiple times, we can just shuffle it. And yeah, shuffle is also returning a void. So let's put another dot here. And now we have the list of cards which are shuffled. And let's emit or let's select or set this card as selected. Let's disregard all the other things that the user had. We are not helping them in giving cards to their preselected cards already. So let's put here set cards dot first, or rather first or null. Do we have that? First or null is an extension function of the collection. That's a package that's actually built with or comes with Flutter. And that's a hard thing to implement that or import that. But yeah, I do have it here. So that means it's imported here. Importing is a problem here. So there can be cases when something doesn't want to work and it's not clear why. First or null. Now I have it and I don't know which one. Maybe the freeze annotation pulled it in. I could import that somehow with just called collection, but I don't know now the syntax for that. So let's go with this. So what we did, this first or null, it can happen that there are no sets currently on the board. So calling first would fail. So we have first or null. Great, let's hot restart. Pressing hint selects cards. Great, and if you tap it enough times, it makes your job easier. And if there are multiple cards selected, it discards what you had. All right. Yeah, great. Last thing, which I was thinking about that would be a great thing to do together, is that +3 button that we had here, or I showed an example. I cannot show an image of it right now, but let's just implement it and see how it will go. It's possible in set, like the rules let you to draw 3 additional cards if the guys decide that we cannot find a set in this board. So it's nice if you support this here as well. The function for that is already written in the qubit. So we have draw 3 extra cards, and it's handled like you can draw 3 extra cards if there are 20 cards, 12 cards on the board, like the cards are not running out, and the deck can already supply 3 cards for us. If it cannot, then obviously we cannot draw. Okay, that widget is defined line 129. It's part of the info panel on the right, but that widget is pretty empty right now. So let's put here first a button just to see that it works. So if we wrap this widget and let that widget be an outlined button. Okay, format it. It requires us to define an onPressed function. Okay, let's reload. Now it's a button that can be pressed. Another thing that was first a little strange for me when I started with Flutter, but it actually makes sense, is the enabled or disabled state of a button depends not on a property like disabled, but actually if it has a handler for being pressed. So if I would pass here null, then this would be disabled out of the box. First it's strange, but yeah, it makes sense. Sometimes you would want to override that, so there are cases when it looks strange that on certain condition, then this should be an actual function, but that condition is not true, then null, so that could be awkward. But you can have a getter for that, like a function that resolves and returns the proper value. But ultimately it's handy, or it makes sense. But now this button will actually do something. Let's again read out our qubit and draw 3 extra cards, but only do it. Well, we don't need to check it because this function already does the checking of can it draw a card. So we can just spam this button actually. 3 cards appeared, but this button is still here. Although I can press it, it's handled that it cannot draw more cards because there are 15 right now on the board, so nope. I mentioned implicit animations. Let's do that. So if we wrap this outline button with an animated opacity, this widget requires a duration. A duration type can be created using all these units. Let's make it like, I don't know, 400 milliseconds. And it requires also an opacity parameter. Now, we want this to be visible when it's actually possible to draw a card. So we will now use context.select because we want this thing to re-render when the state changes. So we select the game qubit. And from the qubits state, we will select can draw 3 extra. Yeah, bool is not int, and that's all good. So if it can draw cards, then it should be visible. OK, so then if this is true, then 1, otherwise 0. And this duration can be a constant. OK. I should pick a set here for that to appear, so let's just go from the other route. If I select, click this button, it disappears. And it did that in 400 milliseconds, but let's just showcase it that it's actually disappearing in 4 seconds as well. Implicitly, I didn't have to say anything how I want, but it's pretty telling that I have an animated opacity, I define the duration. Its opacity is depending on a certain state. Now, this can come from a qubit or wherever. It can be a parameter as well. But ultimately, I define the opacity, the duration, and everything else is handled for me. And that's really great. So I really love this. Obviously, you can do many things. Like there are many animated, all kinds of widgets, animated stuff that you can do. Animated, positioned, and aligned. So it can, the engine just can do many things for you without you actually having to specify how it should do. You just define the what will be the end result, and most probably what it will do for you is what you want. So that's really nice. OK. That +3 button that we had in the example was a little bit more, well, it looked better than this widget, this button right now. Not that it doesn't look good. It has this, ripple animation or effect, which I really like actually. But let's make it a little bit more advanced. How it was on the example is that there were 3 cards, and they were like rotated away from each other. So let's do that. How to do that? We need to show 3 things on top of each other. And to do that in Flutter, there's a widget called stack. I think it's not written here. So you cannot use right now the Flutter plugin with VS Code. A great thing, I think, is that really increases the developer performance is if you have snippets which are doing the wrapping for you. So, for example, I actually don't have a snippet for stack, but I have a snippet for column. So if I wrap something in a column, it creates a children. Like it wraps what I have in a children. But let's just go on the way of writing it out from hand. So let's write a stack. And it has a children. Now a children is a list. And in this list, we can put in the widgets which we want to show. Another thing which I would want to do is wrap this thing in a sized box. For sized box, I define what is the size that I want this to take at most. Usually, what we are using when we are developing an application is not using actual values like 50 here, but use scaled values. That means that try to implement the screens that are given on the designs the way they look using the values that are proportionate to the size of the screen in relation to the design size. So if something is, if the design is for a bigger iPhone, and if I would want to show that on a smaller screen, then if I would use these plain values, then it wouldn't look good because it would overflow in many directions. So there is this ages extension method property that we use. And how that's working is, simply put, in the main function or main file, we define here, we set up the scale. We set up what is the design size and what's the screen size. So if the screen is much smaller, then 50.ages becomes 40. It's scaling. It's scaling the values. That's what it does. OK, back to setboard. So let's say that its width is 50. Yeah, OK, nice. All right, so we have a stack. And what we want to show are three cards. So we need to put here 2 more widgets. The way how it's rendered, the first widget is rendered first, and then the coming widgets on top of that. So the thing that you want at the bottom is it should be upper in this array. We have a widget called empty card. Let's see how this looks. Maybe it's exactly behind it. And the other thing which I want to do is rotate it away. Let's see how it works. I call transform.rotate. And to this widget, I give this empty card as a child. So I want to rotate this. Let's rotate by -10 degrees. Degrees is, again, extension function on integer. Let's see how this looks. I want to give it border color. Ha! Cheating time. Right? OK. Yes. OK. But what happens if these are not here? What do I see? Oh, it's here. Now, if we draw this on top of it. OK. We will need to make this a little bit smaller. But let's now just go with this not changing its value or not changing its height. So as you saw behind this button, I have another widget, the empty card, and that's rotated by 10 degrees. And the pivot point or the origin of the rotation is the bottom left side of it, so it's rotated from here. So if I now have another empty card, and let's rotate this with a little bigger amount, and we can make these constants so it's not green, yellow. I've rotated this, and now at the end I can also rotate this whole thing. So let's wrap it in a widget. That will be transform.rotate. Yeah, this is another thing which is not so nice. If I'm now pressing enter here, at some points it gives you or completes your code in a way that you wouldn't want. So I already had here this bracket or brace, but I want the angle to be actually here. So now if we rotate this whole thing with 10 degrees, and I think I need to looks okay-ish, not so good. But let's leave the fine-tuning for later. I know, maybe just this. Okay, a little better. You could do it differently, like you could not rotate the whole thing, but rotate the first one and put the button as the last one. Anyhow, so this is how you rotate things. It's straightforward, kinda. So, yeah. That was mainly the things which I wanted to show to you. Do you guys have any questions? Anything that you would like to be covered, or you would want to hear differences or anything? Good, thank you. Support. What we have still here. So we talked about navigation, talked about fetching data. Yeah, the scale. Hooks. It's also possible to create your own hooks, and that's a really nice thing to lift up the logic that, or repeating logic that there would be, and the hooks widget or the hooks package comes with many great predefined hooks that are not just coming from the React world, but actually usable in Flutter, and it helps you not using stateful widgets where you would need to dispose things. So hooks are really great. This is, so you have hooks, you have qubits, which is similar to context. And as you see, a widget is basically a build, like it has a build function, which is a class components render function. So the philosophy is really the same. The way you build things is really similar. Obviously, the syntax and how you define is different, but at the end you will have components put together and wrapping one with the other. This is now the well, not the trend, but the way how it goes, because React is like this, Flutter is following this. Jetpack Compose and Swift UI is also following this paradigm that makes it's more functional, it's more declarative. You define what you want, and it takes care of the engine takes care of the framework of the rendering, and yeah, so it's really great, and I think it's really similar. I like the experience more. I like so I'm not comparing now to React because I don't have so deep experience in it, but comparing it to my previous experiences with other frameworks, this is the best experience I had so far developing for mobile, and so it's not a question for me why it's ranking so high in the Stack Overflow surveys. It's actually loved by me for sure, and when I'm talking about my colleagues or previous university friends who already tried Flutter, they also have similar experience. So not like I'm trying to convince you now, but still a little bit, because I really love using it, and if I would have to develop an application only for Android or iOS, I would definitely go with Flutter because it's just much saner. So that's really great. That was all the things which I wanted to talk to you. So I think we're done. Thank you.